People say, well, do you believe in God? It's a question I don't like at all. It's not the right question. You can look at the stories, and the stories make tremendous sense psychologically, and they imply something divine.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not willing to dispense with the implication because, for example, I'm not willing to dispense with the idea that there's something divine about consciousness. I think that's like a definition of divine.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever consciousness is, that's divine. You say, well, is there any reality to what's divine? Well, yeah, consciousness is divine. Well, it's an axiomatic statement in some sense. I would say, well, why is it divine? Well, it can call forth order from potential.
Mm-hmm.
That's an element of divinity. You say, well, that isn't really what I mean by divine. It's like, well, what really do you mean by divine exactly? Is it is it something eternal? Well, I don't know, because I don't know what consciousness is like.
I have an idea about that. I think it's the force that drives this game that we're playing.
Well,
whatever that might be.
Okay, well, but that's a very archetypal idea. There is, like, one of the deepest mythological ideas is that, well, there's nature, and there's culture, and there's consciousness. Those are the three things. And consciousness, all three of those play a causal role. Or it's nature, culture, and consciousness. That's the individual in some sense. And it seems to me that that's as true as anything that can be said. And there's more to it. That's how you act in the world. Like, you act towards other people as if they're active mediators between order and chaos. And if you don't, they do not want to play with you. And I think, oh, that's interesting. So here we are in a situation where no one will play with you unless you treat them like they're the divine mediator of order and chaos. And people say, well, what do you mean by that? It's like, well, I act like you have free will. I act like your choices are important. I act like you're a responsible person or should be held responsible. No, I act like you can learn from your mistakes, all of those things. And if I don't do that, then really you don't want to have anything to do with me. So now you might say, well, that's not proof. It's like, well, it depends on how you define proof.
Mm-hmm.
It's a kind of proof. So,
well, it's definitely something you can observe in people.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
You can observe that they act as if that's true. It doesn't mean it's true.
Yeah.
But it certainly raises the suspicion that it might be true.
Yeah. Back to that little bit about divinity and something that I heard you say before. There seems to be something going on right now with mankind, humankind. You can't quite put your finger on it. And I was always, when I listen to that, I always think like, well, it's sort of obvious what's going on if you look at mankind's history. Like, we're gaining complexity. Mm-hmm. That's what we do. I mean, if you look at the Neanderthals and where we are right now, what we're doing is we're gaining complexity. And that's because we are learning more about the world. And the more we learn about the world, the more we start to realize how incredibly elegant our cosmos and our universe is. We had an astronomer here, and he tells us about the fact that, for example, if the configuration of our universe, the rate at which helium converts to some other element was only slightly less.
Entropic principle.
Yeah, then this entire existence would not exist. You and I would not be having this conversation right now. And if I think about stuff like that, it's all either it's a big set of occurrences and it's just luck, or if you look at everything, how everything fits together, my rational mind only goes like, this is almost too convenient that it all works like this. And if you look at the board that we're playing at, that seems to be aiming at more complexity. So that's sort of the way I feel about that. How do you look at that?
I like the idea of it. It's like more sophistication in some sense. And there is a drive towards that, or there is a movement towards that. People, that the real, like, what would you say, that sort of militant evolutionary biologists say, well, there's no aim in Darwinian evolution. And I understand what they mean. And I understand why they say it. And it's a powerful point for reasons we won't go into. But by the same token, life was a lot simpler than 3.5 billion years ago than it is now. There is this drive towards, and not at every level. There's still lots of single-celled organisms, right? So, but there's certainly part of the game has emerged and transformed itself at ever-increasing levels of neurological complexity, for example.
Especially if you zoom in at the part that we just described as divine, the consciousness. So, I don't know if dolphins can be considered truly conscious. I think they can. They don't seem to have that tendency, but us humans definitely do. And I think
well, I
our
think they're
consciousness
conscious.
is
I don't know how self-conscious they are. They're somewhat self-conscious.
Yeah,
they
I think
can
there's a
recognize
test.
themselves in mirrors.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it's a pretty low level of self-consciousness to recognize yourself in a mirror. I mean, human beings have a delineated self-model of themselves that they're constantly updating. We're self-conscious in about 10 different dimensions. And some animals have the rudiments of that. Elephants do.
Yeah.
Chimpanzees seem to, dolphins seem to, but compared to our elaborated self-consciousness and our clear knowledge of death, there's a big gap. Elephants play with death, you know. They play with, but they definitely mourn, and other animals mourn. I've seen dogs mourn and cats mourn, but elephants will go to where there are bones and check them out. It's like they're right on the cusp of knowledge, I would say, but they're not linguistic, so I don't think they can manage it.
Yeah, but it seems to me that once consciousness rises above a certain level and it's a bit able to do the stuff that you just described, then it starts gaining complexity. There's just this thirst in us that can't be quelled somehow. We want to gain more knowledge.
Yep.
If you talk to an astronomer, they're giddy about how much we do not know yet.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good example of the biological instantiation of the hero myth. You know, we're designed to boldly go where no one has gone before.
I love that. You're a Star Trek fan, by the way.
Yeah, but that's why Star Trek is such a big deal. Why these heroic adventures? It's mythology for engineers, right? It's religion for engineers, essentially. And there is a great adventure in going where you don't know and mastering the territory.
Yeah. And if you look at the Star Trek universe in particular, that these guys, what I always liked about it, especially the old Star Trek, is that they were all like these almost archetypical heroes. They always did the right thing. They were always going, like they had their directives, and of course they were humans and they made mistakes, but there was this moral that seemed to be so much higher than what we had in this particular time at Earth. And it was something to strive for. Like Captain Picard could be a role model for leadership in a lot of senses.
Well, that's exactly what he is. And he is a role model for leadership. That's why people are watching him, because, you know, any leader, a fictional leader like that is... A fictional leader is a quasi-messiah, right? It's a fragment of the messianic archetype. And so it might be the fragment that particularly appeals to you. So if you're a techie, you know, you want your messiah to be captaining a starship.
Yes.
And that's where you get your fragmentary messianic vision. And it's important, it's vital. And you see that with Star Wars. You know, all these people, they say, well, I'm atheist to the core. Or you're a Star Wars fan. Oh, yes, I'm a great Star Wars fan. It's like, well, you know, those two statements don't go together. So, and it's obvious. I mean, with Star Wars, I mean, for example, the screenplay was specifically influenced by Joseph Campbell's work, who was, of course, a devotee of Jung and who studied archetypal patterns of behavior. It's not a hypothesis to say that geeky atheistic engineers get their religion through Star Wars. It's just a statement of fact. So, and we should pay attention to that, because those things, I'm not making fun of that, not in the least. I think these stories are so vital that it's good that you get them in whatever manner you can get them.
It's funny if you think about it. Like Star Wars is atheism. You have these guys in robes believing in an intangible force called the Force.
Right. Right, well, exactly.
It doesn't get more religious than that.
And it's a straight morality play. It's good versus evil.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's right. It doesn't get any more religious than that. And you see the same thing with Harry Potter. You know, he's a dying and resurrecting hero, for God's sake, you know. He's touched by evil, and Voldemort is clearly a satanic figure. So...
How do you feel about the tool of the heroic journey and using that to project yourself as a hero as you go on?
Oh, it's exactly what should happen. That's what it means to be properly enculturated, is that you see yourself as part of the ancestral succession of heroes. That's what you're doing. That's what you should be doing. You want to live up to that, you know. That's why you should have some gratitude towards your culture, is that it's established by these flawed figures of the past, obviously, but that's good because you're flawed too. These people who at least rose above their flawed nature to some degree and established something wonderful, which is something that you should be striving for, that makes life worth living.